That you came. I see a lot of faces in the audience that need to be thanked once again for their participation in this thesis process, and that includes John Sueda, who's not here, but whose team made us a gorgeous exhibition, and I hope you all get a chance to go over and look at it. And our remarkable thesis team, Martin Vinetsky, Mara Holtzskov, Maria McVarish, who is here, Scott Miniman, who's here, Wendy Jew, Colin Owen, and our two tireless writing teachers, Leslie Roberts and Barry Cates, have all just worked incredibly hard to make this process successful. For those of you who haven't been around at these talks before, I want to just take a second to explain to you what it is we mean by a graduate program in design. That people ask, so what does that mean? It's very broad, you know, it's all over the place. Well, we bring students in who are trained or who have experience in graphic design, 2D, industrial design, 3D, interaction design. We also have students coming from integrative biology, economics, history, who have demonstrated some skill and expertise in an area of design. We call this a transdisciplinary program, and I want to make sure that that's a clear word to you. We're used to the word interdisciplinary, where a team sits, an architect, an interior designer, a landscape artist, and they work together on a project. And then when the project is done, they go their separate ways and they form another team later. That's interdisciplinary. The difference between that and a transdisciplinary practice is that the designer makes a commitment to be changed by the collaboration. So the more people collaborate across these boundaries that we think exist between 2D and 3D or 3D and interaction, the more they become larger designers. They're able to think about systems that have parts that are different from one another. They're able to envision them, to manage them, and to produce them. So these are people who are committed to growing in a particular way across disciplinary boundaries. And what we see is that our alumni have remarkable practices where this really shows, and the strategic and research abilities that these students develop serves them incredibly well in the world of work. I'm incredibly proud of this year's class. I feel like we have finally hit our stride from 2007 when we had 8 graduates, I believe, to this year with 35, and we've all rehearsed for the last many days. One of the people I'm proudest of is our first speaker today, Julie Mendez. I've got her bio written down here, but I don't think I need to read it. Julie grew up in Lodi, California, although in her childhood she lived in Mexico. And she comes to us with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Visual Communication with a minor in Chicano Studies. And that's from, where'd you do that? UC Davis. Julie's thesis work explores a really delicate area of conversation in our world today, and by encountering it, she's evinced remarkable courage, and I am very grateful. So please welcome Julie Mendez.
Thank you, Brenda, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. So I want to start by telling you a short little story. In April of 2008, I was interviewed by a professor at UC Davis. She was working on a project, and her project was about farm labor. She was interested in the process of food and how food gets from the field to the table. She was interested to know what it was like to grow up with a mother who had worked in a cannery for 27 years. She asked me a series of questions. She wanted to know what it was like to be in Mexico while my mother worked here in California. She wanted to know what my thoughts were on immigration reform. So she asked several questions, and as the questions proceeded, the interview took a slight turn that I wasn't expecting, and I would like to share that with you. There we go.
So tell us about when you ended up going to Iraq.
So we ended up going to Iraq in March of 2003. As soon as I got to my unit, the unit that I got into already had orders to be deployed, so I already knew that I was going to be deployed. There was no surprise there. Everybody was getting deployed, and it was wow, I don't even know. It was an experience that I would, not even if I wanted to, I could never forget. It was very, very difficult. So, sorry, I don't really talk about this. I've had a lot of issues since I came back. And it's really hard to talk about it, but I get very emotional when I think about it, but again, it's like I have to, tell, because people don't know. They just don't know what is it that happens to people. I mean, I came back alive in one piece, and I'm glad that I did, but sometimes I wish that I didn't, because I feel so guilty that I made it back alive and other people didn't. So you might be wondering why I showed this video, and why would I want to make myself so vulnerable to all of you and show you all my weakness? Well, I wanted to show you this video not because I want your pity or your sympathy, but because I want to show you that the topic of my thesis is real. The consequences are real, and this is something that needs to be addressed. It is definitely crucial for everyone to hear the veteran experience and to understand the veteran point of view. As you have seen, I clearly have a strong emotional connection to this work, but being able to look at this topic from two different perspectives, from a veteran perspective and a designer's perspective, being able to see this has been the key for my work. During the initial stages of my research, I came across some information that became the leading part of my work. This is basically that more veterans are committing suicide after they come home from war than while they are deployed. But not only that, compared to civilians, veterans are at a much higher rate for suicide. And as you can see here, the red is the veterans and the black is the civilians. The research that I have done so far comes from a variety of books that look at war from different perspectives. Author Chris Hedges, he writes from a journalism perspective where he discusses how media affects the perspectives that civilians have on combat. Chris Hedges is also a war correspondent who has reported about the conflicts in Sarajevo, Bosnia, and Kosovo. Author Jonathan Shea writes from the perspective of a psychologist or a clinician. He currently works at the VA in Virginia, and also looked at current clinicians such as Keith Armstrong, who work at the San Francisco VA. And he wrote a guide or a book that talks about the steps that veterans should take to prepare themselves once they return from deployment. I was also interested in photography and how imagery can influence my work. There was a photographer in particular who I was interested in. Her name is Jennifer Carity, and I was interested in her work because she looked at the combat experience and reenacted that experience once the soldier was back here at home. I also felt that it was important to look at current films also from different perspectives. For example, The Dreams of Sparrows was shot throughout 2003 and 2004 by an Iraqi filmmaker to show the Iraqi civilian perspective. Walton Bashir was also an animated documentary that tells us the story of a Lebanese soldier who cannot recall any of his combat experience. This film was particularly interesting to me because it highlights the aspect of memory and how that goes hand in hand with post-traumatic stress disorder. Operation Homecoming was also a very interesting documentary as it allowed the viewer to experience combat through the stories being told. This was a documentary that was a collection of writings, photographs, and video from veterans that were deployed in the Iraq and Afghanistan war. But above all, looking at these different documentaries, I felt that it was very important to look at documentaries and nonfiction films as opposed to Hollywood and the glamour that Hollywood shows. And after doing a lot of the research and looking at different projects, I wanted to see what was currently out in the world, what was currently existing, what was in the state of the field. I found some great projects like Combat Paper that allows veterans to use their creativity and make their own paper and make imagery through their old uniforms that they had. I also wanted to know what was out there as far as someone being able to share their story anonymously. And this was a project that I found which was Post Secret, which allows people to mail thoughts and opinions anonymously through the mail. There was also a website that I found which is great. It's called Veterans Book Project, and this is a project that allows veterans to make their own books, share their own experiences, their own photos, and basically gives the general public the opportunity to buy these books. And then, of course, another organization, which a website is called In Their Boots, and it's a fellowship program that allows veterans to create their own film, their own documentary films. After looking at the research and the state of the field and the projects that currently exist, I began analyzing the reasons why there is such a great disconnect. Veterans are not telling their loved ones that they're struggling with issues. Their loved ones cannot figure this out because they're not mind readers. How are they supposed to know? And it all boils down to the lack of communication. This is the problem: no civilian, no veteran dialogue. Some veterans might not talk about their experience because they might have fear, guilt, or embarrassment, and many of them have symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder but never seek help. Family members will often be clueless about these issues going on. Many of the families that have had a soldier who committed suicide, they will often say, "I had no idea, I didn't see this coming, he was fine," and it all comes as a surprise. So this problem led me to the question that I have worked on for my thesis: how do we bridge the gap between veterans and civilians? Since October of 2003, millions of soldiers have served in Iraq and Afghanistan. There are approximately 5.2 million people who have PTSD in the United States, and out of those 5.6 million, out of those 5.2 million, 1.6 million of those have PTSD and are veterans. And as of course I mentioned earlier, the suicide rate for veterans compared to civilians is much higher. And to make that a little bit easier to understand, me as a civilian, I am 7.5 times more likely to commit suicide than you. This is why the importance of fostering a dialogue between veterans and civilians is critical. But this lack of communication is not just happening between veterans and civilians. There's a piece of the puzzle missing, and this is a piece of the mental health professional. Communication cannot work without the clinicians taking part. These three groups of people provide an integral role in the transfer of information, and the communication that takes place is critical to understanding the veteran experience. Last semester, I worked on several projects that helped me raise awareness within the CCA community. Both of these installations took place during Veterans Day. The first project I did was a life-size graph filled with toy soldiers that was in the back of the nave. Of course, this was a graph that was used to represent the high rise in suicide. The graph represented the following statistic. In California, between the years of 2005 and 2008, soldiers under the age of 35, which was over 1,000 of them, committed suicide, and during the same time period, only 334 of them died in the battlefield. I also created an installation that was my personal view on the war. This installation included silkscreen posters that covered the wall and a mannequin that was covered with military patches. These two projects gave me several insights regarding the CCA community and how people interact with this topic. I learned that when someone's pathway is obstructed, they're more likely to pay attention to what's in their way. Also, scale and repetition are key components to get people to interact with my work. Also, having physical objects that people can take with them proved to be successful as they are reminded of the information that they were confronted with earlier. Part of my research was also gathering information for research purposes through interviewing veterans. These interviews gave me several insights regarding their personal experiences, and I also used drawings to get a deeper, meaningful conversation about their experiences as a form of communication. During each interview, I asked each veteran to think of a time and a place while they were deployed that had a deep, meaningful impact in their life, something that remains in their memories and does not go away. The responses elicited many great, interesting conversations that normally would not have taken place without the creative activity in place. The interviews and the drawings gave me new, important information. I learned that veterans generally have a stigma about PTSD and being diagnosed with PTSD. They fear that the general public will think that they're crazy, and they do not want to seem weak by their peers. Also, having a soldier do a creative activity made them a little bit more relaxed, and it helped them be more open during conversation, regardless of what their skill level was with art. The veterans were also more comfortable discussing their experiences with me because they knew that I shared a similar anecdote, and the idea of sharing those same stories with someone else, just a civilian, probably would not have yielded the same results. A project that I worked on this semester was called The Fallen, and this was a collaboration between Marilyn Camacho and I, a student from the Fine Art Department. And the project was to elicit participation within the CCA community so that people could interact by handwriting the names of the fallen soldiers, all of the soldiers that have passed away since 2003 from both Iraq and Afghanistan. We considered this project to be performance art, a performance piece, where people could write as many names as they wanted. During the time the installation was in place, a student here at CCA wrote in red marker on the wall, he wrote, "What about the 122,000 dead Iraqi civilians?" The student also left a letter with his name on it where he compared what we were doing, counting the fallen, to slavery, the Holocaust, and communism. He did this and this incident happened twice. After the second time, my classmate and I realized that this was clearly something that we cannot ignore. Our audience was demanding a dialogue about the topic. So we created a wall specifically for that topic to take place. The student never returned to write anything else on the wall. But this incident was a great example of the question that I'm trying to answer for my thesis. How can these two groups of people communicate with one another? Here's one civilian whose opinion was polarized, and then on the other end, there's a veteran trying to open the lines of communication. But this project did more than that. It also caused other people to question the freedom that we have as students here on campus to express our opinions on school grounds. A fellow student had a discussion with me regarding what happened about the incident, and she then emailed me later, and she wrote, this is part of an email that she wrote. "First of all, I think it's a great idea. Despite the fact that our school invites its students to create art that matters, we both see a lot of artwork around CCA that reflects the artist's feelings about social and political issues. One aspect of your work is the public quality of it and how it exists in participation of others, like history itself. And just like what happens in social, political, and public situations, we hear opponent voices. Encountering this piece after someone wrote on it, I suddenly could connect even more with the work." This performance piece showed that people were definitely sensitive to the physical act of writing someone's name, a name of someone that was no longer alive. There was one gentleman in particular who seemed very interested in our project and was taking pictures, and I approached him and I said, "Hi, would you like to participate?" And he said to me, "No, I don't feel very comfortable doing that. This is something that I don't feel like I can do. It's a responsibility that I don't want to take." So people clearly create a distance between them and the reality of war, especially when they're being confronted with it. The topic of war pushes people away, but at the same time, it also creates communication among students and the communities involved. Another project that I compiled was a video. I gathered all of the footage that I had from the interviews that I did with veterans, and I created a 10-minute video which will be playing this evening in the viewing room for the reception for the MFA show, so you're more than welcome to look at it. But in the meantime, I will show you a short preview.
You know, intimidating as Marines are, and then this white donkey just glistening in the sunlight.
Yeah, my unit was great. I love those. I miss those guys.
I mean, I don't know, there's just something really sexy about getting ready for war.
Everybody always wants to know if you killed
In
anybody.
some aspects, it's like you actually have more love for them than your own brother or your own sister.
You hear another doop, and then another one, and then you hear them come in. When they come in.
The kid was tied up to the front end of a Humvee, and one eye was open and glossed over in gray, and the other eye was just shut.
I have dreams I can't remember, and I wake up and I'm covered in sweat. I've had dreams where I felt that I'm getting choked to death.
The current project that I'm working on is called the Confidential Project. And this project consists of a kit that I mailed to 3 groups of people: clinicians, civilians, and veterans. And the kit included a journal, a pen, instructions, and envelopes. And the idea is that I would send the journal, the kit, to a veteran, and that veteran would send it to someone else, and so on and so forth until the journal comes back to me. And I did this exact same thing with the rest of the journals. And unfortunately, I have only received a few of the journals in return, which happen to be the journals that I send out to the clinicians. But even though I've only received those few, I'm already beginning to see some correlations based on the information and the entries written inside of them. And what the goal of this project is to have people be open and honest about the things that they write, and they all had questions to choose from. And because they are confidential, there's no way that I would know who wrote in it. It helps people be honest and comfortable about what they write. I am currently in the process of reviewing the informationals inside the journals, and I have to figure out what the next step will be. It is very important that I note the correlations between the 3 sets of journals. The journals include massive amounts of information, and I need to make sure that the next step I take clearly shows the depth and the complexity of the writings. Although I only have a few of the journals, I can already see the trends of information. For example, several entries were about vicarious traumatization, where the clinicians themselves become traumatized simply by hearing the veteran's story. A lot of them also mention that they've just become nicer and they've become more empathetic to people in general, especially people who are less fortunate than them. There is one entry, and it reads, "In general, I am a bit desensitized to many things after listening to people's descriptions of traumatic events they have experienced. I have this skill of disassociating now as a means of protecting my own psyche from secondary traumatization." So as you can see, people, although they're clinicians or professionals, they cannot really separate themselves from the veteran experience. There were also several entries regarding PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and what it actually means, and if that's an appropriate name for it. Some said that it's not a disorder, that it's an injury, and that having preventative measures would help, as well as psychological preparedness. And many agreed that medication is not an answer, it's not enough. As I think of the larger picture and how my project will work in the larger context, I feel that my insights and my research can help other nonprofit veteran organizations create a system or a solution to facilitate dialogue between veterans and civilians. I believe that working with organizations, nonprofit organizations, as opposed to working with government organizations, would yield better results because there aren't that many bureaucracies involved, and it would make the whole system, the whole project a little bit easier. One organization that would be suited for my work is Swords for Plowshares. This is a local organization founded in 1974, and they basically just help veterans. They help them find work, they help them with legal assistance, employment training, anything that they could possibly need help with. And they're also very involved with the arts, which would be perfect for my work. And as I continue my thought process and my ideas with my topic, with the support of a nonprofit organization, I could create a set of tools that would get communities talking about the war experience. These tools could exist in various forms. Perhaps one tool could take the form of a nationwide campaign that could guide civilians on how to actually have conversations with veterans. The campaign could include public service announcements, billboards, websites, and printed collateral material. Another implementation could be to give veterans an actual kit, some sort of kit that would include a camera, some sort of audio recording advice, a journal, give them the means to relieve their stress, to talk about their issues, or to get them out of their system, to help them with their daily activities and whatever frustrations they might be having in the field. I would also like to share my findings with clinicians that would be interested in creating a sort of pen pal system. This could be a program where clinicians could be partnered with soldiers to maintain communication throughout their entire deployment. The system would allow each soldier to have a support system before, during, and after their deployment. I imagine that these tools could easily be implemented with other nonprofit organizations throughout the country in order to increase awareness and communication. So when looking at the current situation in Iraq, it is astonishing that this war has gone on for so many years now. The Vietnam War lasted 16 years, and we still notice that veterans from Vietnam are experiencing the consequences 40 years later. War and politics are serious topics that will always incite conversations and opinions, but people seem to forget who is truly being damaged by the conflict. Combat is like an infectious illness that affects everyone who comes in contact with it, beginning with the soldier, then the family members, the clinicians, and their family members. Too many young soldiers are suffering quietly from depression and PTSD. And this is why it is critical that an open system of communication exists between veterans and civilians and those people close to them. It is time for people to accept the reality of war and allow themselves to hear the combat veteran story. Thank you.
I think that you originally were working with the Veterans Administration at some point, and I'm just curious, as this goes forward and you think about potentially a national campaign, would you consider working with the Veterans Administration on that?
That would be great, except that I don't think that they would become the lead for a project because, for one, I mean, you know, budget cuts, that just, for one, funding wouldn't be, you know, of course, nonprofit organizations also have budget problems, but I feel like working with a nonprofit specifically would give the project more freedom to move forward. And, you know, of course, it'd be great to have the support of a government agency, but I wouldn't want that to be the main source. Hernandez?
Did you feel that doing this project, it brought a little closer and a little deal into your
Yeah, of course. That's the reason why I worked on it, and that's the reason why I wanted to do it. And that's the reason why I wanted to share, you know, because something like this is personal, and I felt like it was very, very important for people to listen. So, yeah, I mean,
sense talking about it without.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, I feel very comfortable talking about it now. I want to talk about it. I want to help other people be able to talk about it. And yeah, I feel like my thesis definitely has helped doing that. Thank you. One more? Dan, go ahead.
I want to thank you for your, not only for your service, but also for your service after your service, because I work at the VA. One of the things I see is that veterans like yourselves that bring these issues up and bring them up in a public forum where you can have that dialogue between veterans and other parts, other parts of the country. That's really helpful and healing for the veterans and for the rest of society that has to figure out how to deal with these issues. So I want to thank you for bringing that up.
Well, thank you.
And now for something completely different. This is to Lien, also known as Angelique, here in CCA. And Sue is from Taipei. She loves to travel and experience new cultures. She earned her bachelor's degree in metalsmithing from Fujian Catholic University in Taiwan. And as a new resident of San Francisco, she says that her favorite thing to do is to wander around and discover new places, get information about the world that she's now living in. In her thesis project, she is going to probe the psychology and sociology of tourism here in San Francisco and look at how she can intervene with doing a better job of maintaining the balance between the economy and cultural tolerance in the domain of tourism. So please welcome to Lien.
Thank you, Brenda. Hi, I'm Lien. You can also call me Angelique. So my thesis project is to discuss how the design can reduce the social conflict that tourists will bring to the cities, and how can we balance the economic and the social tolerance. Tourism is the biggest industry in San Francisco. There are a lot of tourists in this city every day. Actually, 1 out of 7 is a tourist in this city every day. But what do tourists do? Tourists love to take cable cars and take a lot of photos and take the sightseeing tours. Of course, go to Fisherman's Wharf. They spend a lot of time stay on the sightseeing tours and take cable cars and line up really long lines, almost for hours. So actually, we spend 40% of our leisure times on vacations, and most of people plan their trips on the internet and book the package tours online. For example, San Francisco provides a city pass that makes tourists take cable cars and go to Fisherman's Wharf to see the sea lions, and of course go to the Alcatraz Islands and went to ferry building to enjoy the seafood, and then go to Golden Gate Bridge to take the photo as same as their postcard. Their favorite activity is to take the sightseeing tours and go to Lake Lombard Street to look at other tourists, and also went to a department store to have a big shopping, and then went back to their hotels and finished their 4.6 days of their vacations. Most of the tourists will post their pictures and share their travel information with their families and friends, and make their friends and family do the same thing as they did. But however, San Francisco, it's not a theme park, right? For locals, San Francisco got its really distinguished elements in every different neighborhood. But however, the tourist industry formed these theme park-like promotions and have a lot of misleading and inappropriate slogans that even amplify people's hedonistic thinkings. Then I was thinking about what's theirs in the market. I interviewed the bookstore's owners and asked them for the best sales. And I figured out that most of the best sales publication is the pop-out map and the pocket guides and free map, which only contain little information about the cities. And also, people's favorite choice is the package tours that provide on the internet that only make the tourists go to the specific area like the Alcatraz Islands and Fisherman's Wharf that contains little knowledge about the real locals' life. For example, the Afric Fishers, who is a photographer, he did a project that used Flickr to trace people's photograph. Where is the most photograph spot that took by tourists and the locals? And the red line indicates the photos that took by tourists. You can see that most of the tourists stay in the waterfront area, downtown area, and the Golden Gate Bridge. So some of the people might think tourists are annoying and tourists are ill-mannered sometimes because of this travel routines. So this travel routine actually formed a transformation to the tourist area. For example, Fisherman's Wharf. Most of the locals refuse to go to that area. So let's see how locals think about the Fisherman's Wharf and tourists.
Down on the tourists. Keep the tourists in the Fisherman's Wharf. But whenever you travel, you never really see the real city.
Residential area, business area. It's not like you're going to be bothering the locals. Locals don't live there, they might work there. Most things tourists are annoying sometimes because they may not watch where they're walking, because they don't know how to use the buses.
You know that from the interview, they're sort of intense between the locals and tourists. Actually, Fisherman's Wharf right now got an improvement plan. They want the locals be back to their areas. But how could we construct a better interaction between locals and tourists and make them to understand each other better? So why not reduce the crowd in a single area? Maybe we can lead the new travel pattern for tourists and make a better engagement with locals and form a friendlier environment for tourists. Actually, ultimately, the whole problem stems from the misunderstanding of each other that has been exaggerated and cemented through a stereotype. So right now, let's see what's the typical tourist stereotype in San Francisco. So I interviewed the tourists and the tour guides in the sightseeing tours, the most popular one, and I spent 2 hours to stay with them. And for example, the first tourist that I interviewed, Crystals, this was his 3rd time to visit San Francisco, but however, he still stayed in the Fisherman's Wharf and do the same thing. And like Maria and her boyfriend, they know nothing about San Francisco, and they get the travel information in the Fisherman's Wharf. And Lisa, she is a Germany. She got the travel information from her aunt. She has no ideas about the cities, and she just do the same thing that her aunt did. And then Hossein is the tour guides in the sightseeing tours. He say tourists are easy to get bored. So he only take 15 minutes in a single area. But the most interesting part is he said that he used the well-known subject and the well-known events and movie to introduce the area to Who Kids audience. But why should we care about this? Why it's important? Actually, in next 5 years or 10 years, the tourist numbers will double, even triple more than now. The most important thing is, for example, the Chinese tourist is the biggest potential outbound tourist in the world. Since 2007, U.S. government signed an agreement with China to facilitate Chinese group travel from China to United States. Imagine that. Actually, the Chinese tourists will be 7 times more than now in 2020. So this is the current cable car station that we have now. But 10 years later, will become like this. If tourists still do the same things and stay in the same areas. And there will be more and more tourists to block the street and don't know where to go. So when everyone is yearning for the boom of outbound tourism business, but are you ready for face the huge tide? Are those tourists ready for the cultural shock? It's not just about money and market. It's about biases, conflict, and transformation that it will bring to the city. But you know, everyone could be the tourists and everyone could be the locals. The most important thing is to make each other to understanding the diverse cultural and the difficulties. So then I interviewed the insight expert, John Neguchi, who works in the San Francisco Convention and Visitor Bureaus. He said that when tourists face the trouble, give them knowledge and listen to them. It's not easy for a foreigner who come to the really unfamiliar place and ask them to act appropriately. So how might we show tourists a closer look at San Francisco to implant a more accurate impression through providing a sounder travel pattern? How might we make tourists to aware of their behaviors and also make the general public understand tourists' difficulties? So the idea is to, why not go get involved in San Francisco to bring the tourists to the cities and to form that better environment for them? So I developed 60 sketches and focused the ideas on why not just provide the information on every sidewalk and also modify the publication that we have now. So then I work on to make my ideas to test on a prototype, and I arrange all the informations and build up the small scales of models, and then test on the real image to see what will it be like if it's really applied on the sidewalk. This is the image that I have tried. You can see include a direction or neighborhood boundary and a map on the sidewalk. So in order to know what people's reaction about this project, I also did a sidewalk texting and interviewed the pedestrians.
Every district of town would have something like this.
That's a map.
That's a direction. Oh, that's cool.
That's a direction. What does that one say? It's a little history about the Knob Hill. I think the map's pretty good because like a lot of people are lost.
I think the map is better than the read.
In 10 seconds, if I'm walking by, it's the glance. I would use something that's a map that's visual. This one's easy because it's a grid.
This one tells you where, like, there's Russian Hill that way, North Beach is there.
I kind of like the cartoon things. They're more fun. They're more individual. This is functional, and you know exactly where to go. That you're going now, there, downtown.
I think the text works better. The text.
I work at a tourist place, and a lot of tourists like ask me these things, and like something they can read and understand.
If it's text, it becomes more important.
It's part of the landscape. I like it.
Maybe some colors with attract people.
Provide arrows and directions to show them
where generally certain areas are.
If these facts were there, it's interesting. People would want to know. It would actually promote tourism because they'd go back home and say, did you know this?
So from people's feedback, I know the map, text, and iconic image works better. So I refined my design. And in order to simplify my design, I arranged the inner aisles of the sidewalk to be the path for tourists and visitors for not blocking the street. And the middle aisles will be the main information that closer to pedestrians. And the outer aisles will be the minor and simple contents, for example, like the city policy, neighborhood boundary, bus stations, and a QR code for the tourists who want to know more about the information. They can use their smartphone to scan the QR code and link to the San Francisco Convention and Visitor Bureau's website. And the information on the sidewalk can provide 3 to 20 minutes walk to increase their walking rate and to explain them to the cities. The design should be a system that only build one per block, but not build 4 in a corner. And also to arrange different information on different sidewalk. For example, for the neighborhood boundary, they will have neighborhood overview and the basic. And for the historical side, we'll get the stories and the historical heritage. And for the locals restaurant and shop, we'll get its locals activities, informations. And for the different width of the sidewalk, for example, for the 6 feet wide sidewalk, it will only contain the destination point and neighborhood boundary. And for the 8 to 10 feet wide sidewalk, we'll have map, directions, and destination point and neighborhood boundary. And for the sidewalk which wider than 12 feet, we'll have all the information like I mentioned about in the previous slide. And then work on to really test out the concrete. What could I do? The really carving or the insert materials on it. For example, try the different textures, different colors, and a different font size, and also the different materials, and even try how the carving should be, and also try different method like stamping, or use the recyclable materials. And then I work on the small-scale models. And also built a real size, a grid of the sidewalk that use map to explain my ideas. And actually, when I display this on the sidewalk, people are really get the positive feedback and really want one to build up in the corner. So to stress in the essays and the connection with the tourist market, the ideal scenario is to have a local friend who can show you around the cities and to embed to provide the really accurate perspective about the cities. So use a well-known subject to embed the city's perspective. Let them be your guides. So the idea is to modify the current neighborhood exploration map that we have in the market and transform it to be more memorable, valuable, and tourists can fold it as souvenirs and fold it as a statue after they finish their travel. Sorry for that, I just speak out Chinese. And so, for example, I use Alfred Hitchcock to indicate the neighborhood around the Nob Hills and Russian Hills and North Beach. For example, I will have the local shops information like the local restaurants around the 2 sides, and middle one is the neighborhood map, and also provide the best landscape around the neighborhood. And in order to encourage tourists to explore those restaurants and stores, I also include a nude versions of the Alfred Hitchcock, and people can ask for the sticker to dress the Hitchcocks up. Once they dress him up, they can get the free ice creams from the participate stores. And every participate stores will get the little icons that printed in front of their sidewalk. So by applying different characters in the same neighborhood, for the visitor who is not a first-time visitor, they can have different paths to explore the cities. I also bring my ideas to interviews to the local shops around the neighborhood, and actually most of them are willing to participate this project and think it's a really good idea to promote their stores. So the idea should run as a system. Once change a travel promotion to be go get involved in San Francisco and provide the information on the travel website, and also provide the neighborhood walking map in the airport and the hotels, and also collaborate with the public transportation to encourage tourists to explore, to use the Muni system more. And also, the information can expand the tourists into the city. So once they expand to the city, they will get the information on the sidewalk and feel the sense of security and want to explore the other neighborhoods more. And then this travel system can make tourists more likely to benefit to the local business. And also, ideally, when they complete their trip with a good feeling, they will share their new travel pattern with their families and publish their experience on the website, and to bring more business to the cities, and also helping them to have a more accurate impression about this city and form a better relation between locals and tourists. So my next step is to promote my ideas to San Francisco. But the first step is to propose my ideas as an art project to the art commissions. And then once it be approved and really build one in a sidewalk, I can bring it as an evidence to market with the San Francisco Convention and Visitor Bureaus, and collaborate with the American Society of Landscape Architects that make the system more complete, and then get a budget and really build my design in every corner in this city, or even apply in the other city in the world. So my ideas, like my ideal scenario, is to have a virtuous cycles for the mass tourism. So why not San Francisco speak for itself? Thank you.
We have time for discussion.
I'm going too fast.
Make comments?
Barry? I know.
Maybe it just seems a little arbitrary, especially given his body type. But maybe if it were something that assembled his different movies or something. Anyway, never mind that. I thought this was just wonderful, and I cannot help but think back to the presentation that you made 2 years ago, your 5-minute digital storytelling. This seems like a different thinker. And so the question I would actually really love to ask you is, what's the most important thing that you have learned in your education as a designer?
I mean, you mean for this 2 years?
Yes.
Well, I think the most important thing is I learned how to think, like design thinking, because before, like in the design education in Taiwan, that designer is about to create a really cool thing, a beautiful package. But here I know the most important thing is to understand the user, or understand what people really want or what they really need, to understand the market, the whole environment, the whole society, and how the designer will really influence this world. It's really important, because the product or the thing that we create is influence the public, the general public, like a lot of people. It's not just about ourselves and not just about the business only. So I think I will consider more deeply after I got this, learn from all this program.
Did anybody get that on tape?
Yeah.
It sounded like a setup question, but that was not my answer.
Hey.
I have a question about the notion of boutique tourism or maybe a contemporary flaneur, versus mass tourism? Because my understanding of the way people understand tourism, the average general tourist, is that they want a picture of themselves in front of all of the obvious things. You know, I mean, it gives them a sense of accomplishment, authenticity, etc. So I think that this might appeal more to a boutique tourist as opposed to a mass tourist. I think it's really hard, and I'm going to use Omaha as an example because my husband's from Omaha and I can trash Omaha. But you know, if you come in from Omaha, you want to see Coy Tower and the ferry building, and I mean, and they're going to be fearful about the dangers in the mission, and because people don't look like them in these places. So how do you address that sort of boosterism kind of primitive desire for the tourist to validate their having been in these iconic places?
Actually, the reason that I did this different travel path is because from the statistic, there are only 17.5% of visitors is the first-time visitor, which is mean 80% of the visitors have been travel here it's 3 times, 4 times. So I want to provide them the alternate script for their travel. Yeah.
No, I understand that. It just seems like a different kind of market. Yeah, I think people keep going back to the same place.
Like tourists like the famous subject event, so that's why I applied the famous characters as the exploration map to hook my audience.
Yeah. I think the Alfred Hitchcock thing versus the Golden Gate Bridge is going to be a tough. I just think it's going to be a tough sell.
Well, it is interesting that you're talking about. So did I understand you right that 80% of the tourists who come here have been here before?
Yes.
So what you're trying to do is to provide a way to get further into the environment. That's pretty interesting. In terms of, I have a question about the materials and the kind of permits and things that you would need to actually do this. Who do you have to persuade, for example, to put a map like that on the sidewalk?
Like the street usage and mapping bureaus? Yeah, I have talked to them.
I think they ought to make you a job.
They got some limitations for materials, and they give me a list that I should follow.
Did you get an expression of interest from anybody about moving forward with this? The people that you talked to, they're like,
yeah, because I also talked to the managers of the director or chairman of the San Francisco Convention and Visitor Bureaus, and he gave me the connection with the American Society of the Landscape Architectures that I can, talk with her.
Other comments or questions?
Thank you.
So I realized that tourism was a major industry of San Francisco, but I hadn't. What your presentation made me wonder was how tourists are identified. So I've lived in San Francisco for 30 years, but some days I'm a tourist because I'm going to explore some place, to visit some site that I've never been to before. And then there are people who don't live here, but they're in San Francisco for business or something. They don't consider themselves as tourists because maybe their mother is in the hospital or so. Does this mean that being a tourist is a state of mind, or is it the definition of the Bureau of Tourism and Conventions that it's anybody who's spending the night in a hotel and eating in a restaurant? I don't think there's really an answer, but it just seems like these are sort of very blurry distinctions.
The design not only can benefit to the tourists, but the new residents in these cities. Because from my previous interview, people think because, for example, as a new resident, they think they want to know more about the other neighborhood. Like people say that they didn't feel the sense of security to explore the missions or other area. So I think that would be great if I condense this information and to make people think it's a familiar place, it's a really safe place that I can explore. So it's actually, this design is served to the general public. It's not just for tourists, because the design for tourists is really important to be a universal design that can be understood by everyone. So I think, yeah.
We have time for one more. I wanted to ask Angelique about affordances for blind people. What can you tell me about, I'm seeing these variations in the height of the sidewalk. What can you tell me about your knowledge of that and what the needs are for blind people?
Yeah, actually, I did discuss this question with the street usage and mapping bureaus, and they say it's not allowed to have the carving informations around the blind sidewalk, but I have used material to insert into it and make its surface be flat, then that will solve the problem.
Okay, well, thank you very much,
Thank
Angelique.
you.
This is Alice Chang. Hi. Alice Chang grew up in Taiwan, where she fostered an interest in visual subcultures such as anime, cult films, and street fashion. After she earned a BFA in Library and Information Science, she pursued her passion for visual communication through illustration and graphic design. Her thesis is a formal exploration for creating a visual language based on Lolita fashion, which is a Japanese subculture. So please welcome Alice Chang. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alice. Thank you for coming to my presentation. Today, I want to introduce you a new way to look at fashion. And you will be looking at a very peculiar fashion style. It's called Lolita fashion. These are the standard uniforms in Japan. From kindergarten to high school, students are required to wear uniforms every day. But if you go to Harajuku area on Sundays, you will see these young people dressed in extremely complicated outfits that consist of various styles. It's like a carnival of fashion mashup happening in Harajuku every Sunday. This is Jingu Bridge, the landmark of Harajuku, where these dressed-up people gather around and demonstrate their elaborate outfits. Among all these dazzling styles, you will notice a dolly look, with a variety of motifs, such as goth, confection, or even traditional Japanese kimono. This is Lolita fashion. What do you think when you look at this? I was amazed when I first read this magazine, Gothic and Lolita Bible. I grew up in Taiwan, where strict school regulations are adapted from Japan. So in addition to uniforms, we had to wear designated bags, shoes, even hairstyles. So I was really impressed by their courage to challenge the normal fashion standard. Originally, I thought that Lolita fashion is just a subculture that praises the acute and feminine aesthetic, and the name Lolita somehow reference to the Western meaning that it's a sign of jailbait. But after I studied a range of academic analysis, criticism, press interviews with Lolita fashion designers and wearers, I learned many interpretations that explain the role of Lolita fashion in Japanese society. Lolita fashion is a visual statement that responds to the social and cultural expectations on women in Japan. It can be read as a way to escape or a form of rebellion. I think these meanings behind the surface of Lolita fashion are significant because they demonstrate attitudes of gender roles in Japanese social context. But people usually are distracted by the superficial layer of Lolita fashion. And misinterpreted it like I did before. Then this is why I want to visualize how I see Lolita fashion now from a social and cultural perspective. My intention was establishing a framework to represent the underlying story of fashion. Based on this framework, I created a visual language for Lolita fashion without using the style self-referentially. That means I didn't simply replicate the existing Lolita visual language we can see from magazines or other media. My visual language is a new way of deploying visual elements to represent fashion. My thesis framework includes 2 sections: context research and image-making explorations. I first studied the social and cultural concepts which Lolita fashion stands for. Then I explored ways to visually represent my insights from the research. My image-making process includes letterform study, fashion display by illustration, and deconstructing fashion items. Now I want to show you how I experimented, evaluated, and modified my methods to represent what I learned about Lolita fashion. The first concept I looked at was feminine indulgence. The main feature of Lolita fashion is excessive feminine decorations, such as bows, laces, and ruffles. There's no such thing as being too girly or too decorative when it comes to composing a Lolita look. It's about creating a youthful and cute ensemble for the wearers to revive a feminine childhood fantasy. It's also about challenging the common sense to dress properly for one's age or social status. People usually consider Lolita fashion as a youth subculture because of the childlike appearance it creates. But Lolita wearers actually range from teenage girls to women in their 30s. It is for any woman who wants to return to a romantic childhood fantasy. Based on this interpretation, I think of composing a Lolita look by decorative garments as a form of feminine indulgence. My method reflects this process of layering and decorating in Lolita fashion. I made decorative pieces by clay, such as feathers, leaves, and ruffles, and then layered them on wire structures to create letterforms. This is another similar study. I used whipped cream, ribbon, and petals as materials. They are visual elements commonly used in Lolita design. When I evaluated this study, I realized that I need to use these visual elements differently from how they were originally used in Lolita fashion design. Otherwise, I would end up just repeating the existing Lolita visual language, using decorative elements as decorations. It's problematic because to use this style self-referentially because my work will be viewed as just another Lolita style creation. I would not be able to communicate the concepts I was looking at. So I tried to reframe Lolita visual elements when I continued to represent other concepts. Escapism and cultural hybridity are the key concepts when I further looked into the fantasy constructed by Lolita fashion. Lolita fashion designer Naoto Hiruka said that Lolita is a way to escape from the stranglehold on women in Japanese society. This theatrical look is created by decontextualizing Victorian dress style and combining it with a modern Japanese cute aesthetic. So this look is something exists beyond space and time. It's a neo-Victorian style. I wanted to represent the neo-Victorian fantasies these Japanese women desire for and construct by Lolita garments. My making process was inspired by how fashion display conceptually showcase fashion styles. So I created fashion displays by illustration as an approach to visualize the neo-Victorian fantasy. As I mentioned, I tried to reframe visual elements of Lolita fashion. So I took elements such as whipped cream, ribbon, doll face, then merged them together and create surreal and dreamlike scenes. I also incorporated Victorian architectural trims and decorative forms. Then I tried to strip away Lolita aesthetic and conceptually visualize the idea of cultural hybridity by merging visual elements from different contexts. My images gradually became undefinable, as you can see here. In this piece, I merged mechanical and organic visual forms found in Lolita fashion images. But I guess nobody can see it if I didn't say that. And as you can see, mixing everything together will cause less visual reference relate back to Lolita fashion. So I found these images are interesting and I had fun making them, but I wasn't certain if they effectively represent Lolita fashion. So I decided to look at concepts that have more connection to the forms in Lolita fashion appearance. I was inspired by sociologist Quentin Bell's statement on the relationship between identity and fashion. He believes that fashion is a natural extension of the body or even of the soul. And my making process was inspired by fashion deconstruction. Fashion deconstruction is a process to reveal the mechanics in producing fashion, such as exposing linings, zippers, and seams. Basically, fashion deconstruction strips away the aesthetic of clothes in appearance and emphasizes on the underlying forms of fashion. So using deconstruction as reference, I examined and revealed the spatial forms of Lolita fashion items, then converted them into architectural forms. My idea was to think of fashion as an extension of our identities and fashion items as our personal portable territory. I examined Lolita fashion bows, shoes, and dresses, and looked at their details, such as the scalloped edges and ruffles, as well as the overall shapes built up by the garments. After some iteration, I reintroduced the key feature of Lolita fashion to the architectural dress form I created. I took bows from a Lolita dress, including physical bows and the patterns, and I combined them with the architectural dress form. I tested another method to use Lolita visual elements. In this study, I took petals and redefined their function by using them to construct the leather form instead of layering them as decorations. So it's a floral leather form, but it looks different from the floral leather form I created in my first study. I applied this method to revisualize Lolita dress form. At first, I took models' hair from Lolita magazines to compose the dress. The hairstyle I chose is princess curls, made with light brown colors and heavy waves. When I evaluated this study, I realized that although it is commonly featured in Lolita magazines, similar hair can also be seen in other fashion styles. It doesn't only connect to Lolita fashion. I realized that the material I use should relate to the interpretations of Lolita fashion. It needs to define Lolita fashion in the social context. It needs to symbolize the meaning of dressing in Lolita fashion in Japanese society. As I mentioned in the beginning, Lolita can be read as a way to escape or a form of rebellion. Since I've already experimented with the idea of escapism, for this study, I focused on how Lolita fashion functions as a form of rebellion. So now you might think, what do I mean by rebellion? How does this stereotypical feminine look have any strength to rebel? Japanese sociologist Mary Kontani explains that the excessiveness of Lolita fashion is similar to the campiness of drag culture. That means by exaggerating stereotypical feminine features such as pink colors, laces, and frills, these decorations become objects of visual resistance against the acceptable social norms. Kamikaze Girls is a movie about a Lolita girl who grew up in a small town in Japan. Instead of dressing in aggressive fashion styles such as goth and punk, This girl exaggerates a feminine and adorable look to rebel against the expectations to be submissive and the ordinary girl in Japanese society. In fact, like I mentioned in the very beginning, goth and punk styles are both appropriated by Lolita fashion to create sub-styles, but they are transformed into these cute and girly looks by Lolita aesthetic. From this standpoint, I perceive what this girl tried to say as, you want me to obey, be gentle and girly, so I'm putting on all these extremely feminine things. I'm a grown-up woman and I dress like a porcelain doll. Am I a perfect girl for you to possess now? Can you still appreciate it? I want to visualize how Lolita girls use too much good things to provide a sense of sickening. The idea is like feeding their audience too much whipped cream. It gives people a sense of gluttony. I chose whipped cream to represent how Lolita fashion creates the sense of gluttony by a hyper-feminine and hyper-cute appearance. I created this distorted cream shape to suggest the grotesque feeling in some Lolita ensembles. And I used it to compose the basic Lolita dress form. I tested different ways to create the whipped cream dress, including digital and physical making methods. The digitally made cream dress has a light and dreamlike ambience. On the other hand, the handmade dress shows the materiality of whipped cream in detail. The delicate and tender materiality of whipped cream resonates to the feminine and youthful attributes of Lolita fashion. So I believe this method resolved my problem about creating a convincing visual language to represent fashion concepts. Because the material and image-making process both symbolize the attributes of the subject. In the beginning of my research, my intention was to understand how styles could be studied from a design perspective. It's been a challenging but also very exciting journey to see how this inquiry has developed into a process, exploration to deconstruct Lolita fashion from a social and analytical perspective. So what can we as designers take away from this exploration? I think through this lens of social and cultural context, we can discover powerful stories of how people use fashion styles to express their attitudes. And in the case of my study, the story I found are the escapism and rebellion of Japanese women expressed by Lolita fashion. These powerful stories can be translated into images by experimenting with material and image-making process that can reflect attributes of the subject. I hope my framework can be further applied to analyze and represent other fashion or inspire potential approach to communicate fashion concepts. I believe this is a creative and interesting strategy to provide inspiring visual narratives and deeper interpretations for people to understand fashion. Thank you.
We have time for discussion. I think Mr. Cates has a question. Dr. Cates has a question.
Alice, I thought the visual transformations were wonderful. They're just incredibly creative. So the question I have is, Lolita is actually, there are two characters there. One is Lolita, and one is Humbert Humbert. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Okay. So part of the story is the story of an aesthetic of visual resistance and visual self-expression on the part of the girls. But the other part of it is how they are perceived by an observing, male gaze if you want, but it could just be a tourist gaze, all the people who gather on the bridge. I've been there. And I think,
did you dress up in?
Fashion has a good look on.
So I guess the question is, are you as interested interested in how the people wearing these fashions are perceived as you are in how they are expressing themselves. Did I say that clearly enough?
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah, I can try. The question is, you're clearly interested in the Lolita fashion as an aesthetic of resistance for these girls.
Right.
Are you also interested, or should you also be interested, in how they are perceived by the larger society?
I think so. I talked to some of the Lolita wearers here in San Francisco, because when I visited Japan like a few years ago, I wasn't familiar with this culture. But then after my last semester during the design research and development class, I talked to some wearers here, and then they give me this feedback that they understood how people perceive them. And they actually kind of embrace that kind of interpretation, because this is like, I know how you look at me. I know you're looking at me this way, but I'm still dressing like this. I think it's sort of another kind of statement for them to show their courage, not being afraid of perceived as a sexualized object. I think that's how I see it.
When we first talked about this at the beginning of the semester, I remember your first images are of the schoolgirls and their uniforms, and I said, wow, you know, what about the whole sexual fetishism around that, around Sailor Moon? And your response to me was, you know, everything is sexualized in Japan.
That's still true. I mean,
so what I'm seeing here is that the difference between a schoolgirl uniform, which is kind of a straightforward imitation, and this extreme is much more aggressive. And you really helped me understand that, so I appreciate it. My question is, if I were, so taking the methodology that you use, where you're playing around with form and materials and forbidding yourself to be self-referential, could that methodology work kind of backwards for a fashion designer to start with things like, I mean, like whipped cream or, you know, hamburger, or speaking of Charlotte Cooper, or whatever, you know, and actually use it as a prop for invention, as well as using it for methodology for analysis.
I think there's a possibility for that. But I guess I haven't really talked to fashion designers, I mean, for other styles. So I think maybe that could be a potential path for me to explore. Yeah.
Also, I'll let you guys know that at the reception tonight, I hear said that Alice will be wearing some Lolita clothing, so we can look at Alice's. I've been leaning on her to do it. Other questions, comments? We've got some comments.
I just have a comment about the fact that it's still safe in Japan because the context is there. You know, I've been there also, and you know, if it was one person parading around like that, it would be fairly rebellious. But I think that the context is pretty safe. What is interesting to me is that, in contrast to Victorian sensibilities, it takes the female from the parlor to the street. And that's a huge, huge difference. And I also want to commend you on your presentation. It was extremely well done.
Oh, thank you.
This is Amo Isu, and she grew up in the East Bay. She is racially Asian and ethnically Latino. She earned her, and we'll stop with the adjectives there. She's very cool, I'll say. She earned her Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering at Yale University. And after graduating, she pursued her passion for music and performance, releasing a full-length album on Absolutely Kosher Records, and playing in the demented two-piece zoo. That's really typical for electrical engineers from Yale, I guess. Her thesis work explores self-promotion and celebrity in the age of new media. So please welcome Amo Isi.
Thanks, Brenda. Hi, everyone. My thesis is titled, "This is Not Self-Promotion." As time speeds toward a mysterious future in which everyone can have a voice in the digital worlds of Facebook, Twitter, and other participatory technologies, celebrity becomes an ever more elusive term. I think about David Hasselhoff and wonder if he qualifies as a star anymore. Surely during his 90s run as Beach Hunk Mitch, Hasselhoff was a famous dude. Baywatch was popular, and even if you didn't watch the long-running series, you knew about its premise and recognized the Hoff by name and by image. But that was then, and now it's unclear for what Hasselhoff is most well known. Is it for Baywatch, his long-running German pop star career? Or is it the unfortunate late-night home video taken by his daughter of him eating a cheeseburger off of the floor while very drunk? Most of my peers would reflexively shout, "Drunk cheeseburger," at the mere mention of the Hoff's name. And if this is his extant legacy, does he still qualify as a celebrity? I don't think so. I think the Hoff has sadly fallen from stardom and into the famous joke realm in which many a dead celebrity lie. Rest in peace, Charlie Sheen, Lindsay Lohan, and Mel Gibson. As I contemplate my own identity as a performer, artist, and musician, I wonder what sort of fame I'm really after and how that can be attained. The opportunities for self-promotion that new technologies such as ubiquitous computing and new uses of technologies such as social networking have brought have expanded greatly, and so too has the number of people vying for their slice of the fame pie. I think to myself, in a sea of losers, how do you win? Media produced by the masses is edging out mass media, bringing new opportunities for visibility, self-promotion, and exchange. How do independent artists define success in the context of these new opportunities? How might they find or create their audience? And how can they establish a relationship of exchange that transcends simple commodification and ephemerality? One thing that the many recent media blunders have taught me is that one's digital and physical lives have become so intertwined that a single misstep can be everlasting. Howard Dean's fatal, oops, well, you heard it. Or more recently, Spencer Pratt's faux pas. Pratt, who along with Heidi Montag, was once the appropriately liked star of the reality show The Hills. Recently, in a long-running ploy to get media attention, Pratt crashed The Hills finale in a conspicuously contrived aging hobo disguise. Although he did get coverage by some blogs, though they were mostly just mocking him, I think this is a good example of what I do not want to do: self-promote at whatever cost and become a popular and short-lived joke. My first exploration tried to underscore the idea that our digital lives are written in stone. I made this image to be circulated and then to be removed at a later date. I named it "This Image Will Die." I asked people to upload it to their Flickr accounts, to post it to their blogs or Facebook accounts, and then I attempted to kill the image a couple of weeks later. I was able to find what I think are most of the images and requested their removal, but there definitely are others that have not been put to bed. Granted, this image does not have the juicy allure that many an undying sex tape have, but it was an exercise that did prove to me how hard it is to erase something once it has lived online. The next project I did was to try to see if I could lure people with a sticker campaign that had a technological bent. I got a Google Voice number and then made a website, text415-488-OMG9.com. It would publish a text of anyone who texted that number. The tagline is, "So there's always someone to share your OMG moments." Stickers like the colored image right there were put up on parking meters, bus shelters, mailboxes, all other objects. In revisiting the stickers to take photos, I noticed that many of them were removed. But I also realized that as more and more people, companies, and social groups begin branding themselves, the stickers were competing with a lot of other stickers and signage. The immense proliferation of brands led me to some research. For one, mass-produced media must make way for media produced by the masses. Chris Anderson popularized the idea of the long tail in this context in a Wired magazine article. In 2004, Anderson looked at the rapidly changing music industry. As online distribution and retail, such as iTunes or the then popular Rhapsody.com, offer such an abundance of choice, the market potential of the sum of the many small sales, such as the sales of songs by independent artists, becomes as great as the millions of sales of pop music hits. So you see the two areas under the graph become about equal. This model shows how independent or more obscure artists possess a statistically important position in consumer interest or even market share if the distribution channel is large enough. As the number of brands and people vying for brand recognition increase, the need to step back and analyze what is going on in mainstream culture as it relates to a changing technological landscape of promotion becomes ever more important. Not only are media by the masses overcoming mass media, but analogously, audience networks are replacing broadcast networks. A broadcast network can be thought of a central hub that is disseminating information to a bunch of receivers. As participatory technologies have become so omnipresent, audience networks, in which information is passed from peer to peer or community to community, have become the norm. The death of American newspapers is evidence of this. Since 2009, the percentage change in news audience fell across all media, in some cases drastically, except online, which increased its viewership by 17%. Much of the debate over the so-called Ground Zero mosque happened on online forums, and in the case of the recent Egyptian protests, we were getting most of our news from Twitter, while CNN's coverage paled by comparison. It is debatable whether the quality of Twitter news feeds is on par with major news programs, but the fact remains that audience networks have taken a much larger role in the average life of an American. So what we are left with is an almost infinite choice of brands, or in the context of my thesis, artists and musicians, and an infinite choice of platforms through which performers could make themselves visible. It's worth noting here that the viral video and related internet memes resulted from this shift of networking. The top-down controlled narrative of the media gave way to the network controlled by the lawless masses, whose tastes continuously evolve. And although popular internet memes like LOL cats can get a lot of hits, in the entertainment business, I think it's a kiss of death. Nobody wants to be known as Chocolate Rain Guy or Double Rainbow Freak, and especially not that drunk guy with a cheeseburger. I then looked at how people interact with media and advertisement. One large-scale distinction is this lean back, lean forward model of interaction. These terms come from a physical model of how people absorb media. In the lean back interaction, as one does when watching TV and cuddling with the dog, when advertising comes on the screen, one tends to passively watch the advertising. Whereas in the lean forward model of interaction, as one might do in actively engaging with a laptop to find an article or a bio of a band, if an ad pops up or if there's a sidebar that has a loud video playing, you immediately look for that little X that will close up the pop-up or the button that will mute the sound. Today, these terms reflect less of a physical method of engaging with media and more of a level of how active the audience is in engaging with the media. Television has moved beyond simple watching because of DVR capabilities, on-demand and freemium services, and computers, as well as iPads and mobile devices, are often now used as passive entertainment machines with the advent of Netflix Watch Instantly and torrent downloads, etc. In abstracting this model, I found a couple of insights. One is that it's easier to feed an audience advertising if the audience is passively engaging with media. And two, self-promotion needs to be less overtly noticeable as promotion. The relationship between the ad and the observer must instead be central. So this first point led me to the next project, which was a little YouTube video I made featuring a musical landscape that I composed with my artistic companion, Andy Tisdall. The focus, however, was less about my own art and more of an exploration to see how effective piggybacking off of another already popular video would be. The content of the video was a bunch of old cartoons mixed together with a processing sketch I had made. And processing is an open source platform that allows for simple applet programming. I'll show you a little snippet. So I then linked this video to similarly sounding band videos and a similarly themed video, one that was popular to old cartoon fanatics. I got about the same number of views via each method, but more importantly, that number was not that great. I think the takeaway here might be that one's audience, especially for independent artists, is a unique organism that is specifically evolved for your own specific art and tastes and talents. So what is an audience? As a performer, it's a mistake to think of one's audience as simply the people who are watching the performance. An audience is really those people who are organically selected through the appeal of the performance. That is to say, were G.G. Allen to throw his own feces into a group of curious passers-by in his own street performance, most would hate it, run, and perhaps call the police. Yet one queer oddball would remain, shit streaking his Coke bottle glasses in rapt attention, waiting to see what happens next. He is Allen's audience, and his cohorts may also become Allen's audience. When I thought about how I first gained my audience, I remember that it is those first few precious and devoted fans who allowed for the more reserved or passive fans to emerge. Just as there is a process of adoption of technology from hobbyists to professionals to consumers, so too is there an adoption of popularity of indie musicians. David Liddell of Xerox PARC fame talks about this adoption of technology. Using the 35mm camera, he points out that people who began using the camera were enthusiasts who loved technology in an aesthetic way. Once enough enthusiasts have adopted the technology, someone finds a practical application for it, and the exotica becomes more standardized. As more and more professionals now use the normalized technology, a price point is reached, and then consumers use it, and the technology becomes widespread. Liddell's progression of hobbyists to professionals to consumers is akin to the progression from freaky hipster to interested others to general audience progression for adoption of indie music. When hardcore hipster outliers, such as music bloggers, die-hard concert attenders, stalkers, and the like, take notice to a fledgling band, the interested others, who are the occasional Pitchfork.com readers, iTunes foragers, and Pandora regulars, then have an entry point into which lowered anxiety allows them to enter into that audience group, and the masses, or rather those who would take to the music, can then follow suit. So this riddle of how to snare those early adopting fans, sorry about that, is heavily affected by the paradox of choice. Barry Schwartz, the most well-known proponent of this idea, claims that more choice leads to less happiness. He cites that there is an impending feeling of regret for not picking the perfect option. Each option seems less attractive when presented among a slew of comparable options. We experience an escalation of expectations with a great deal of options in front of us, and people suffer from a post-picking self-blame for picking the option that may not have been the absolute best. So one thing that people can do to feel better about this quandary is to be a chooser, not a picker. The difference is that choosers have more agency in their decision and are able to reflect on what makes the decision important. Pickers are those who, when confronted with a slew of problems, just pick. So, with the never-ending parade of MySpace bands asking for attention, audience members must feel like the discovery of a young band is an action of importance. So what to do? Curate. For an independent artist who must self-promote to distinguish herself, but make the experience of choice singular and important for those special few, and also not make the promotion overtly as such. Curation is key. Several years ago, when the forward-thinking founders at Google wanted to go back to Stanford to pursue PhDs, They marketed their project to various news organizations. The news organizations rejected Larry Page and Sergey Brin's offer and said that they were not news aggregators. Now, in the 2010s, news sources must be aggregators, as the internet and other networking technologies has made available every news item one could ever be curious about. In order to stand out as being reputable or edgy or conservative or local, news organizations must compile those pieces of news that fit that description. In lieu of all this, I decided to redo my website, which is still very much in progress. I made these letter forms with my mouth, which is very in line with my taste, as I am always intrigued by the perverted, grotesque, and the humorous. You can see these are just rollover images. And here you can see from where the letter forms came. That's the M, it's the O. I also installed Google Analytics so that I could track my viewership and find out how people found me, where they were located, etc. 2 is taking another lesson from the Google guys. When they deploy new objects, they allow those projects to garner some attention before they begin promoting it. The audience is an organism that must grow independently, and the relationship that the artist does or does not nourish factors heavily into how that organism grows or does not grow. These attempts must feel more special than a simple cloying advertisement. My thesis book is one manifestation of this relationship I hope to cultivate with my audience. I made these urethane rubber prosthetic hands, and readers are encouraged to interlock fingers as you read the content. So just do a little like this, and you peruse, so we can hold hands while you experience the work. The books are in the exhibition that you can hold hands. We can do that together. The third point is lure with intrigue. A large part of the act of forming an audience is luring. Overt promotion tends to lead to immediate dismissal by the observer, but a well-curated curiosity can attract interest. I'm calling this project the parasitic celebrity. The logistics are Photoshop surgeries in which I morph my face with other well-known faces. So this first iteration involves CCA's faculty, including Brenda Laurel, Martin Venetsky, and Guillermo Galindo. I then put these posters of our faces in the graduate design studio. A few weeks later, I asked some first-year MFA design students, most of whom did not know me, what they thought. Of the ones I talked to, some found it funny, others found it creepy, but it definitely got their attention. I then iterated the process with faces like Justin Bieber and Gavin Newsom. And I made posters, and the posters were then wheat pasted around the mission, but I did not include in the poster any method by which I could get feedback, so as not to incur the wrath of the authorities. In the next iteration I did was in a more contained environment of CCA and involved members of the public safety staff. I took photos of Warren, Tony, Marvin, and Haas, and I put these posters up around school. They had pull tabs with my website address and my phone number, and right away I noticed some interest. I walked by a student staring at one of the posters who emitted a noticeable chortle, and that night I received a phone call inquiring about the project. Since then, I've received 2 more phone calls, and when I checked Google Analytics, I found a 1,000% improvement in visitor traffic with 89 new unique viewers who presumably found the website from the posters around school or from their peers, and this was over the course of a day and a half. Robert Drew, an American documentary filmmaker, analyzes the nuanced appeal of karaoke in Hop on Pop. Drew talks about the importance of the role of the audience as members who also have an investment in the success of performances. The performer's image of herself as a skilled vocalist and audience members' images of themselves as supportive listeners are mutually dependent. This dependency emphasizes the importance of the relationship that must be forged between audience member and performer, but it is one in which intimacy or closeness and wonderment or distance must strike a balance, and in which there exists what economists have long called a double coincidence of wants. The audience member must benefit in some sort of participatory way. Merging these faces into our faces addresses some of these issues. So the substantial increase in website visitors is some measure of success, although I still believe that my own personal success as an artist is something more intangible. A central change that has evidenced itself in this internet age is the greater difficulty in monetizing intellectual capital. In the context of news organizations, the absence of online revenue is a greater threat to news organizations than audience loss. The Grateful Dead had a strong business model that sought to avoid over-commercialization of their product. They allowed their fans to record any of their concerts, and even in later years, plug directly into the mixing board, thereby essentially giving away their music. The Tapers then traded their recordings at concerts, and it was the concert sales that made the Dead one of the most financially successful bands of all time. Following this model, in 2007, I drove with my first band to Mega Music Fest Coachella in Indio and gave away over 300 demo CDs. The cover art was of a style that would self-select those who would take to the music. And after many more months of dropping these freebies in furtive locations, we had a sizable fan base, got signed to a well-known indie label. A while later, we released our first CD, which Accelerator Magazine named as a top 10 album. This is all very good, but it's not what I think of when I think of success. I think one measure of success is the quality of the relationship that the performer or artist has cultivated with authentic audience members, who are those who will relate to and have a stake in your artistic intentions. Thank you.
Sounds like you have some fans here in the house. We have time for a couple of questions or comments. Always count to 10.
I was really impressed. I think it's just really thoughtful. And I'm really struck by, maybe it's the interdisciplinary nature of the program, but it seems like you're not, none of the work really rests in any particularly defined discipline, which is great. And I just thought, I mean, if you were to, what kind of application, I mean, some of them are apparent here, but if, let's say you hypothetically went to work for someone, sort of traditional, a company that we would recognize, what application would the thesis project have, and what kind of work would you do? Let me put it another way. How would you sort of monetize this process, these ways of thinking that you've shown us in maybe a more professional capacity or an industry capacity, let's say?
In an industry that would not be the music industry, I would say that I think it's more about the process of the research and how you integrate what your consumers are, how their responses to you. You know, how far do you take their comments? You know, but I think a large part of what I try to do in this not very lucrative career that I have is sort of stepping away from that idea of monetizing the performance or the art. Yeah, but I think it's more about the process of the design research process, I guess. Yeah. Thanks.
Well, how about you apply this as provost?
Recruiting students. I mean, we could hire you in the ESO or recruitment office.
There you go.
Brilliantly, to try and set up that kind of relationship with potential students who come CCA. Yeah, I was thinking
That would
about
be
the
pretty
whole time.
cool. That's a good idea.
Yeah, it's got tremendous opportunities.
Done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that the process that you've been using presents you as an outlaw?
Well, I think it has to do a little bit with that wonderment, distance, and intrigue and mystery. You know, I feel like there needs to be a little bit of that with, you know, because otherwise this relationship that I talk of is no different from a friend, you know. And friends can be fans, but oftentimes they're not, you know, they're your supporters. They're there, you know, they understand who you are, and there's none of this this mystery, about your relationship.
So one of the examples that comes up for me of this method being applied by somebody is Joaquin Phoenix and his remarkable rap performance, where everybody in Hollywood thought the guy had lost it. And then we see the documentary and we get this, oh my God, he's an amazing actor moment. Is there some similarity between what he did and what you're talking about?
Well, I think that if it really were his dream to be the next white rapper, I mean, I feel like what the biggest point is to communicate like that certain honesty. So if that's his thing, then I feel like he needs to go with it. And if it's not acting, which I do love him as an actor too, but
no, it was a gag. I mean, in the sense that after the documentary.
Oh, okay.
He said, I was
didn't see
pulling
that.
your leg for the last year.
Like the Garth Brooks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think people knew that though, and that's why he didn't have a good reaction, and people kind of resented what he was doing. Like there was a sense that he wasn't being authentic, and once he revealed it, even though it was a while later, people were like, "Yeah, we know, we knew he didn't be a rap star," So he actually has lost a lot of roles, and like people aren't hiring him to things because there wasn't that authenticity there. Like he didn't really want to be that rap star.
It kind of backfired.
Authenticity.
Okay, well, let's
Thank you.
take our half-hour break.